So we are now recording, so I just want to welcome everyone to our webinar. Just to let everyone know, this recording will be posted later. So welcome, good afternoon. Welcome to the Tenant Protection Program webinar. I'm Tina Vogt, Program Manager with the Community Development Department. And this is the first in a series of webinars that we're going to be hosting, providing information on our program. So this first webinar is focused a little bit more on our landlords, just because there are some upcoming requirements and some good things happening that's going to impact them. And we want to make sure that they're aware of those things. But that doesn't preclude any questions that we may have at the end from anyone that has an interest as a tenant or as a property manager, or anyone from that has like an outside agency that works with landlord-tenant issues. So we're going to be sure at the end to provide enough time for questions and answers. So I'm going to go ahead and kick us off and start the program. So I'm going to share my screen. I have a quick PowerPoint presentation that I'm going to do. So again, we're here to talk about the Tenant Protection Program. So we're going to start with just kind of the agenda for today. I'm going to introduce you to the folks that are going to be on the panel. So we have a group of folks here. Some of us are going to be presenting. Some of us will be here mainly for questions. We're going to have an overview of the Tenant Protection Program, but we're also going to have our representative from Sacramento Self-Help Housing speak and share information on how they support us and what they do to support the Tenant Protection Program. We're going to have a little bit of discussion on what's coming up over the next few weeks, which is our program registration and billing. And then, as I said earlier, we're going to leave some time for questions and answers. So what we ask folks to do in terms of the questions and answers, please use the Q&A feature of Zoom to submit your questions for the panel. Questions will be answered at the end of our presentation. So you can go ahead and ask your questions as we're going along. If we have similar or repeat questions, we're going to summarize them. So if we have a number of people asking kind of the same question, instead of answering it multiple times, we'll just answer it once. And sometimes we know it's tempting that you have a specific situation or issue that you're facing. If you have something that's really specific, we're going to ask that you maybe save that and send that directly to our office. We can maybe give some guidance on maybe a general question or a situation, but if it's really detailed, the best thing to do is to email our office, and that way we can answer your specific question, because a lot of times there's a lot of follow-up questions that we need to ask. And in the essence of, trying to make sure everyone has time to get their questions asked, we just think that it'd be better to do it more specifically with something to our email. So again, I'm Tina Vogt. I'm the program manager with the Community Development Department, and I manage the Tenant Protection Program. With me is Vicki Riggins Medina. She's the program specialist, and she provides direct supervision of our program. Also joining us is Cheryl Patterson. She's our senior deputy city attorney, and she's with our city attorney's office. So if there's more detailed questions related to the code interpretation or legal questions, she's here to assist us with that. And then Thiri Craft is here with Sacramento Self-Help Housing. She's the Housing Services Director. So she'll be presenting information on the great services they provide, and again, the outstanding support they provide to our program. So I'm just going to give a little bit of feedback on what our program does. So last fall, the City Council adopted the tenant, not last fall of 2019, they actually adopted the program. So they adopted the Tenant Protection and Relief Act, which is the code which established our program. So our role is to assist residential tenants by ensuring compliance with the limits on rent and also protection for evictions. So the program has about over 8,000 parcels, which ends up being about 42,000 rental units. So our staff's role is really to assist tenants and landlords with questions and concerns. We facilitate the fair rate of return and pre-eviction hearings, which we'll be discussing later, and interpret and enforce the city code. We partner with Sacramento Self-Help Housing, who triages our calls, and they also assist tenants and landlords with inquiries, as well as sharing information on other resources that are available. Last year, from March to December, we had over 2,000 contacts with tenants and over 500 contacts with landlords. So one of the things I'd like to kind of cover briefly is some folks may be confused about what's the difference between the Tenant Protection Program and the Rental Housing Inspection Program. So today, we're just going to be focusing on the Tenant Protection Program, but our Rental Housing Protection Program really deals with buildings. So if you really want to know the difference between our two programs is, Tenant Protection Program really deals with people. we're dealing with the relationships between the landlord and the tenant. The Rental Housing Inspection Program, or RIP, really deals with life safety. They deal with the quality of the actual structure itself. So that's the best way to really differentiate between our two programs. There are three key components to the tenant protection program. The first is really related to the property registry and our program fees. The second is related to the maximum rent increase limit. And then the third is related to eviction protections. So the properties that are subject to our program include multifamily units built before February 1995, mobile home rentals, and single occupancy rooms and hotels rented for longer than 30 days. Those that are exempt, anything built before February 1995, single family homes, condominiums, a unit that's occupied by the landlord, a property agent, or immediate family, and then government subsidized housing. So it's really important to understand what's included and what's not. A lot of times we get calls from different folks, and we have to really make sure that they're actually covered by our program. So the one thing that we really wanted to discuss today, especially with our landlord and property owners, was the property registry and our program fees. So if you have a property that's subject to the code, you have to register that unit. And one of the things that we tried to do to make it easier to register was to use information that is actually in our rental housing inspection program. So not everybody that's in RIP will be in tenant protection, but everybody that's in tenant protection should be in RIP. So what we wanted to do with our registry was really work on not having people having to reinvent the wheel. So Vicky's going to go into a little bit more detail about what's included with the registration program or packet, but we really wanted to make it as simple as we could in terms of the registry. So our registration forms are going to be mailed directly to landlords, and at the appropriate time, our forms will be available on our website. And then following registration, we'll be billing. And so again, invoices will be mailed directly to landlords, and they'll be able to pay by mail or online. And the annual program fee is $20 per unit. And I did want to note, because a question came up in a previous webinar or training that we did with some folks, that we're not seeing an increase in that per unit cost. So the per unit cost of $20 is going to stay the same even after the next fiscal year. So in terms of the annual rate increase, it can't exceed 5% plus the change in the CPI. And the maximum increase will never be more than 10%, and it can't be waived by a tenant. So it's really important for landlords to note that even if they should go up 11% and their tenant doesn't say anything, if we're made aware of that, we will be advising the landlord that they need to decrease it to the current limit. So that's not something that's negotiable with you and your tenant. Right now, the current maximum rate is 6%. We'll be updating that annually on July 1st, and it'll be available on our website. Another thing to note is that the rental rate can't be increased more than once every 12 months. So it's not once every calendar year, it's once every 12 months. And the rate limit applies to all tenants regardless of how long they've resided in the unit. So if a tenant feels that a landlord has improperly increased the rent, they can actually file a complaint with the city. We'll investigate that complaint. And if it's deemed that the landlord actually did exceed it, then we'll follow up appropriately with enforcement. So between tenancies, you can increase the rent. So a new base rent level is allowed when the unit is voluntarily vacated or the rental agreement is terminated as allowed by the ordinance. So that's when the landlord can establish a new base rent for a new tenant under a new rental agreement. But then after that, those limits apply. So any rent increase for a new tenant must comply with the maximum rate limits. So we understand that there may be some situations where the landlord feels it's appropriate to go above the maximum rate. And we understand there are certain circumstances where that would be appropriate. So we do have something that's called a fair rate of return process. So the landlord can petition the city for a hearing examiner to review an increase rent that's above that maximum. And so we're preparing Tenant Protection Program administrative procedures that'll detail the process to submit a petition, and it'll be available on our website. The one thing that's important to note is that the landlord's going to have to be able to provide some documentation. You can't just say, I just need to increase it. There really needs to be some support to really justify why it needs to go above that maximum limit. And the hearing examiner is going to decide based on the facts whether or not that's appropriate, and their decision is final. So this is available in detail in the procedures. but this is just kind of the highlights of what's acceptable and what's unacceptable. So some of the things are acceptable are if you have to deal with some really significant costs related to repair, but it's not due to routine maintenance. Increase in the cost of housing services, debt service payments for new owners. Those are just some examples. Some things that not examples is if you're in violation of the city code, those penalties, that's not a reason to increase your rent. So those are just some things to consider. Again, the details will be in those administrative procedures. So finally, we have eviction protections. A landlord must offer to renew rental housing agreement if the tenant has resided in a unit for more than 12 months plus 1 day. And evictions are prohibited without just cause once a tenant has resided in the rental unit for more than 12 months. So what are some of those just cause reasons? Failure to pay rent. And I think it's really important for everyone to note that this is unrelated to COVID. So when we're talking about failure to pay rent, this is not anything that's either covered by the earlier code that the city had for its moratorium or what's now in place regarding to state protections related to evictions. So this is just simply related to the actual act itself that we have for failure to pay rent. Breach of rental housing agreement, criminal or nuisance activity, failure to give access, necessary and substantial repairs requiring temporary vacancy, owner move-in, and withdrawal of the rental market. So again, all of these are detailed more clearly in the procedures. So I know that there may be some questions, and Cheryl will be available to answer some of those on a more broad kind of level, but a lot of this information we'll have available in our processes and procedures. So that way you can go and look in detail what it means when we're saying breach of rental housing agreement, what it means we're saying criminal or nuisance activity. And then we're going to have a pre-eviction hearing process. So if a tenant feels that they've been aggrieved by the landlord, they can request a hearing. And so again, our administrative procedures are going to outline that. It'll be available on our website. And again, that decision is final. So we talked a little bit about the tenant being able to file a complaint and whether or not the landlord has violated the act. So any landlord who violates a provision of the code subject to criminal sanctions, civil actions, and administrative penalties pursuant to the city code. And administrative penalties may be imposed up to $25,000 per offense. And a landlord's failure to comply with any requirement of the chapter is an affirmative defense in an unlawful detainer or any other action brought by the landlord to recover possession of the rental unit. So one thing that's really important to note is that our goal is really compliance versus enforcement, but we will enforce if necessary. So what we've been able to do in some instances is that we've gotten some issues where we've had some landlords who have, for example, increased the rent inappropriately because they were unaware of the limit. We were able to send them a letter advising them of that, and they were able to decrease the rent. Had they not done that, then we would have moved forward with those administrative penalties and held them accountable. So we have a few things that are kind of on the horizon and upcoming. So we do have other webinars that we'll be hosting that we'll be publicizing on our website. So we definitely ask you to check our website frequently. There's actually a feature on our website so that if you want to be notified of different things that are coming up, you can go ahead and provide your email address, and then we can let you know. And then because you registered for this webinar, we'll make sure to send you things in the future. On March 16th, we're going to be presenting to the Law and Legislation Committee. So it was a request from a council member that we provide an update, and there were some proposed language changes. So what this is going to be is it's just going to be an informational report. There'll be no action that the committee will be taking, but we want to make sure that people are aware of that in case they want to go ahead and attend. And that would be something that they would do like any other standard city council meeting. They would call in and they would get 2 minutes to go ahead and speak. But we want to make sure people were aware of that coming up. On the 23rd, we are scheduled with the Sacramento Association of Realtors. So they have an event happening, as well as the California Apartment Association. And we wanted to post those so that if you're part of those organizations, that you're aware that we're doing that. But we also wanted to make sure that folks knew that we're available to come to that. And my joke is always that I'm available for wedding and bar mitzvahs. So if you have something that is planned that you think would be helpful for us to come and present and share, we're really looking for opportunities to share information with more groups because we really want people to be aware of what we're doing. And then finally, this is just the contact information for us. So it's our website. We just updated our website, so it has great new information. And it's just the first step in a series of changes that we're going to be making. So we're going to be putting our policies and procedures on the website. We'll have our forms on the website. We'll have information when we're ready, when it's time for how to register. So it's going to be a work in progress. So we're going to really suggest that you look at it frequently. In terms of contacting us, we have both our email and our phone listed. Highly recommend that if you want to contact our office that you contact us via email. We do check our phone and we do check our voicemail regularly. Our staff is outstanding in getting back to people. But what we found is it's a little bit more problematic with the phone because we end up playing a lot of phone tag. So it's a lot of you leave a message, then our staff calls and leaves a message for you, and then you call back and leave another voicemail message. So we're finding that it's a lot easier to respond and to get information back and forth when we actually do it via email. So we highly suggest that you contact us via email. So that's all I have for my section. So I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Thiri with Sacramento Self-Help Housing. You're on mute, Thiri.
Technical difficulties. I apologize to everyone. Thank you, Tina. My name is Thiri Craft from Sacramento Self-Help Housing. I'm thrilled to be a part of the TTP program in a way that we're here to triage calls. And what I mean by that is we are here for both the landlord and the tenants. So we have a line that's dedicated that we want to hear from you. We want to be able to get those phone calls. Even if is a good way, a best way of saying it is if you are having difficulties with a tenant or a tenant is not sure of what's going on, we'll do a mediation or a tenant dispute. And sometimes we will help be that middle person to resolve maybe an issue that is occurring between the two of you related to some of these issues due to misinformation. So we really want to focus on is just educating both sides on tenants' rights and responsibilities for both parties. So I will put our number on board because we do want to get out and we are that neutral piece that we will try to talk to both parties to resolve whatever we have. If we feel there is a case or there's some substance there, we work very closely with Tina and Cheryl and her team, and we refer those up to get additional questions or concerns answered. So we're here for you. So like I said, we want to triage those calls for you in any way we can to guide you or give you information. We'll make sure the number is placed up, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Okay, thanks, Thiri. And so now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Vicki Riggins Medina. So when I say us and I say we, what I'm really talking about is really Vicki and her very capable staff that actually are hands-on with the program. So Vicki, if you want to talk a little bit more about what people can expect in terms of the registration and billing that's coming up.
Thank you, Tina. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Vicki Riggins Medina. I'm the program specialist with the Tenant Protection Program. And I'm going to provide you with an update of our registration process. So by mid-March, you should be receiving registration packets. If you haven't received a registration packet by the end of March, please contact our office as soon as possible. The registration is a requirement under our Tenant Protection and Relief Act. So the registration must be confirmed and returned to our office. So what you will be receiving in your registration packet is a cover letter providing an overview of the registration and its requirements. You would also receive a registration form. And the purpose of the registration form really is to confirm your contact information and the number of units on the property or on the parcel. And so it's very important that these documents are returned, because that's how you will be billed. You will be billed based on the information either that we have currently on file or any information that you're updating. Additionally, you will receive a correction form within that packet. So if any of the information have changed for that rental property or rental properties, please complete the registration correction form and return that, as well as the registration form, back to our office. You will also receive frequently asked questions that are questions that are most commonly received in our office. And so we're including that in the packet as well. And you will also receive an exemption request form. This exemption request form is for properties that are exempt or not covered under the Tenant Protection and Relief Act. Some of those properties that are covered are apartments that are built prior to February 1995, duplexes built prior to February 1995, mobile home unit, rental units, and single occupancy rooms and hotels, which are rented for longer than 30 days. Some of the properties that are not covered under the ordinance and therefore would require an exemption application if you do receive a registration packet are single family dwellings, rental units, and condominiums or stock cooperatives. So those are some of the instances where you would send back the exemption application. We did send out a mailer, hopefully everyone has received it by now, which provided an overview of the program and information regarding registration, just cause for evictions, and the program fee. The program fee is also a requirement under the Tenant Protection and Relief Act ordinance. And so after you receive the registration packet is returned back to us, our billing should start in about mid-April. So you should start receiving invoices, I would say by April 20th, but those invoices will be going out around mid-April. And so if you have any questions whatsoever regarding the registration process, or if you haven't received the registration packet, please do contact our office. We'll be more than happy to assist anyone contacting our office. And that's all I have for this afternoon regarding registration. Thank you.
Okay, so that's kind of our presentation. We have 3 questions. We have quite a few people that are joining us, so I don't know if people have additional questions that they want to ask, or if we somehow managed to cover the issues that people had. One of the things that I would like to have people maybe do is, I actually did want to get just a little bit of a better idea about our participants. So I'm going to launch a quick poll if folks could kind of complete it while you're thinking about maybe some additional questions that you have. And what we're just trying to get is just a sense of kind of who's joining us today. And then with the thought that we're going to know, and it's all anonymous, so you don't have to put your name or anything. Go ahead and launch that poll now. So if folks can go ahead and kind of just participate in that. But let's go ahead and look at some of the questions. So one of the questions that was asked is regarding whether or not allowing a review of larger rent increase for improvements to an occupied unit, such as new windows or other upgrades, make it discouraging for owners to improve homes of their current residents. I think that with the 6% that we're thinking that hopefully that should be able to cover it, or the percentage that's allowed for the year, and that maybe you're looking at how you look at that over the term of your lease. But at this point, anything that's kind of esoteric, we're not included. And I don't know if Cheryl, if you wanted to add anything about, those kind of improvements and the thought process in terms of those being addressed as part of the fair rate hearing. Sure, you're on mute, Cheryl.
Okay, now I'm going to mute me, sorry. The reality is most likely when a tenant voluntarily moves out, that's the opportunity for the landlord to make upgrades because they can set the new rent. So, but if you have long-term tenants, you want to keep your tenants and you want to do some upgrades, you have the 6%, next year might be higher or lower. And that's really there for you to help and keep your property upgraded and properly maintained, really is what we're looking for.
Okay, Thank
Do
you.
you want me to answer the other ones, Tina?
Yeah, did you want to take one of the other questions?
Sure. So the first question was about squatters living in a single family home. You know, that's not our program, but the answer for those types of landlords is they can call the police, but typically a squatter will claim that they have the right to be there. And so then you have to go through the eviction court process to remove them. I mean, that's how it's always been. So that's the answer to that question. The other one was about, can you give notice to a resident that you offer a new lease agreement to and they choose not to sign it, so they don't want to renew? So if they don't want to renew, it's best to keep a record of that, so you know that you offered it, they said no, and then they have to move out if they didn't renew the lease. There is nothing in our ordinance that says a tenant says that they could get to have a month-to-month lease rather than 12-month lease. It's the landlord has to offer to renew the existing lease substantially the same terms. So if the existing lease was a 12-month lease, the landlord has the right to ask for another 12-month lease. So, and they can of course negotiate changes to the lease agreement between the two of them, but the landlord has to make that offer at least.
Okay, I don't see any other questions.
Yeah, there's one more. No, I'm sorry, I don't see any more questions.
No, I think that's been done. So I just want to make sure that folks don't have any other questions. So I know we have someone that has a raised hand, but do you have an actual, like a question? Because we're trying to do it through the actual Q&A. So, okay. So Laura, did you want to ask your question through Q&A or? Okay, hold on. Okay, so Laura, I'm going to go ahead and allow you to speak. So Laura, you had a question?
Yes, thank you. I was trying to do the Q&A. I'm new at this. Yeah, my question is, first of all, is this for this particular workshop for, I guess I might have missed something, this particular workshop for landlords and tenants, or just landlords?
So this particular section is focused on landlords, but tenants are always welcome to participate just if they want to hear what the discussion is. So if you have a question as a tenant, we're more than happy to answer it. But it was primarily focused on landlords just because we had some things coming up fairly quickly for landlords, and we wanted to make sure that they were able to, we were able to get that information out to them. So did you have a question as a tenant?
Yes, and more of it as an advocate for a tenant. And we're trying to, at the NAACP, we're trying to figure out all of these new rules and how to help our community. And the particular issue comes up with the trying to understand just cause and trying to understand when, what is it called, a declaration? I'm not sure if it's called a declaration. You guys kind of mentioned it, and I may be wrong, but when the sheet of paper needs to be, if someone's going to be evicted or given a 60-day notice to move, when at the time of the notice, is the landlord required to give them also a piece of paper with, I forgot the name of the title, that the tenant's supposed to have to let the tenant know what their rights are under COVID?
So if you want to answer that, under the state law with the COVID eviction protections, landlords have to give tenants this declaration of COVID-19 and financial impacts. If the tenant returns that declaration within 15 days, then the tenant only has to pay 25% of the rent that's due, and the rest is back rent, and the back rent will be owed via a small claims court process that will start in July.
Okay, I did go to a training not too long ago that said all that, but it was so many questions, and I don't understand with this particular situation. The landlord is kind of backdooring. It's just a notice. It's not even an official notice. The notice has been posted on the door, but it wasn't mailed. And I'm not sure where to send these people to because all these rules are so new and the declaration was not provided. And also, where would the tenant go? Because apparently the place was sold in January and December and a new owner in
I'm gonna-
January, and they don't know who
I'm
the
gonna
new
put-
owner
Just
is.
what you do is Tahiri's was chomping at the bit to chime in. And I really think that probably Tahiri would be, so I would suggest contacting our great partner at Sacramento Self-Help Housing and the Renters Helpline,
Oh, okay.
because this is exactly the kind of thing that they work on, especially for COVID, because primarily a lot of the focus of today was on the actual tenant protection program itself, because much of what's related to COVID is really covered by the state. And so our staff and our attorney's office really can't follow through with any
Oh.
kind of compliance or enforcement issues if landlords aren't complying with the state law. But Sacramento Self-Help Housing has great staff on board that can really help people and provide really useful information. So I think we just want to make sure that folks know where how to reach the Renters Helpline. So I think that that's a really good thing to note. So I think for this particular instance, and for anyone else that you have dealing with specific issues, please direct them to the Renters Helpline. Thank you, Mallory. Mallory provided information on for their landlords on how to deal with it as well. So from a landlord's perspective, the California Apartment Association has got great resources to make sure that they understand what they need to do. And then the number for the Renters Helpline is here. So yeah, this is just a really great tool, because you're right, there's so many different things and it's so confusing and it's changing all the time. So really knowing where folks can go and get information is really kind of critical. So Terry, did you have anything else you wanted to add on that?
No, I was just chewing at the butt. So you're there at SB, there's a lot of the new laws that are very complex and they're layered, especially because you've got your TPP, but then you have all these COVID regulations on top of it. So that's why I said, please, we put a number in. You guys, anyone can call that number. And that's why we're here for, is to kind of, we have primary, we know TPP, but we're also then all these other components that go on top of it. So please give us a call at 916-389-7877. Call us or refer a number to individuals that need assistance or are not sure about this stuff. That's what we're here for. So yes, please call us. I look forward to hearing it from you.
We have another question, Tina, if you want me to answer.
Yeah, if you want to go ahead and answer those questions.
The question is, the tenants come to the end of their lease but wants to stay. However, the landlord wants to sell the building. The landlord gives a 60-day notice and then the tenant can be evicted, even during this time of moratorium. That's the question. Separate the moratorium under the city's ordinance. The landlord, even if he's selling the building, cannot voluntarily terminate the lease if the tenant's been there longer than 12 months. So if just because the landlord wants to sell the building, he cannot evict the tenant for that purpose. And I know there's a lot of landlords who wish to do that because the new owner can come in and set the rents whatever they want. But our ordinance prevents that. The new owner has to take the existing tenant and the existing lease. And that existing tenant's protected even if the building changes hands. So that's one thing we find a lot with landlords. We have to correct them a lot on that issue. So who cares if you're selling the building? The tenant's lease continues, even with the new owner. The next one was an issue about if your current lease is month to month, does the landlord have to offer you a month-to-month renewal? Well, arguably, yes. The lease he has to offer has to be consistent with what the prior lease was. So if the tenant and the landlord agree to a month-to-month lease period of time, after 12 months, the landlord cannot evict the tenant because he's been there for longer than 12 months. And then the tenant still has the right to continue with the month-to-month lease unless both parties voluntarily agree to change that. And the next question, what if the tenant is there exactly 60 days? The just cause eviction protections do not come into place until after the tenant has lived in the unit for more than 12 months in a day. So they're not protected from eviction protection after 30 or 60 days, only after 12 months. But they are protected from the rent increases. So all tenants have the protection for rent increases if they're under our program. And then it says, what if the tenant's willing to move out with 6-day notice if the property is being sold? Some tenants are okay with this. You know, if a tenant voluntarily is willing to move out, and sometimes there's negotiation between the landlord and the tenant to assist the tenant moving out financially. But if the tenant voluntarily agrees, then that is not a violation of our ordinance. but it has to clearly be voluntary. It can't be pressure on the tenant that's unreasonable because you want that tenant to move out. We've seen that with landlords too, giving improper notices, wrong notices, trying to, so the tenant doesn't understand what the rights are, and that is clearly a violation of the ordinance. If you're improperly doing notices and knowingly violating our ordinance to get the tenant to move out unknowingly. Okay, so don't do that.
Okay, well, thank you, Cheryl. So I don't know if there's any other questions that have come
Don't see
up
any other questions.
that people have. So just typing an answer real quick. So I think that is all of the questions that we have. One of the things that's really important to note is communicating with us is really important. So if different things come up after this that you have questions about, especially once we actually start sending out those registration packets. So once we start sending out the registration packets, if you have questions, and I really would like to, especially for landlords that are participating in this, it is really important that you send the information back, especially if you have exemptions. So for example, if you have 4 units and one of them is a government exemption, you want to make sure you send that exemption back to us as soon as possible, because we're going to bill based on the information that we have in our database. So if we need to update our database, you need to get that information to us sooner versus later. If there's any change in the schedule in terms of when we'll be sending out the information on the packet or the billing, we'll make sure that everyone on this webinar gets that update. So right now we have those dates in mind and we are bound and determined to keep them, but sometimes things happen. So if there's any changes or anything else that happens, we'll make sure to let folks know. So I think there's a question about whether or not we'll be able to make this available to folks. And yeah, so we'll go ahead and we're going to actually put this on the website. So what we'll do is when it's available on the website, we'll let folks know so they can go ahead, and if they have their own pages, they can link it back to our website so they can have information on what we're discussing. And again, really urge you to go to our website and sign up for those updates, because we're going to be updating our website, especially over the next few weeks, with a lot of information. We're going to be updating it with our policies and procedures. We're going to be updating it with the forms and the registration packets. So if you don't get it, you can have a copy of the packet to submit to us. We're going to be updating it with key dates. So we're going to really be making sure that our website is good. And I want to thank our partners with Lucy and Company. They've actually updated our website now. So if you go to our website, you'll see kind of our initial phase of our update that has some really good information. And so we're really trying to make sure is that it's useful. So with that end, if you look at our website and there's other information that you think we could add or other things that you think is missing, please give us that feedback back. Please let us know what else you need. And then just in closing, again, we really want to get information out as much as we can. So we have those 2 events that are coming up, but we'd love to fill our calendars with more if you think it's helpful for us to come and provide this information or similar information to your groups. So I know Thiri's been doing some outreach to groups. We're always looking for information. Vicki and I are always available if you have questions. Cheryl has done an absolutely amazing job with being really helpful and providing information. And then and our website address is and we made it, we try to make it pretty easy. It's cityofsacramento.org, and I'll type it in the chat. And what's nice is we actually just got the /TPP. So we don't have like the really long one that they sometimes do to us. So it's cityofsacramento.org, TPP is the website. So that's the best place to go to get information on what we have going. So with that, I think that we're done. So thanks so much to everyone that has participated, and we're really, really happy that you joined us, and thank you so much for taking the time to participate. There you go. And thank you to my panel members. I didn't thank my panel members properly. So thank you guys for participating, and we'll see you the next time around.